And hello everyone, this is In Conservation With. I'm really happy to be back here talking to a whole range of different people like we did in the first series, which happened just after the lockdown that occurred across the world. And I'm really happy that it's been quite a successful series and people have wanted more, and here we are. We've got a whole massive range of people coming along. But let's talk about tonight. Tonight we have two gentlemen who have set up an organization called the Finch Research Network. And well, let me introduce them. Firstly, we have Matt Young, who actually was on in the first season talking about finches, ended up talking about crossbills, didn't you, Matt?
Yeah, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me. Hopefully we won't talk quite as much about crossbills.
Well, hopefully, maybe people might want that. But to give you a quick rundown on Matt, I mean, this is a very brief one because we gave him a full extended one the last time he was around. Matt is the executive director. You're the founder of the Finch Research Network, which is also known as FIRN, and you can find it online, of course. He's been observing and enjoying nature since he was a very young lad. He's lived in central New York for the last 22 years, and during this time, he's really started studying everything from birds to orchards, bogs to fens. And that's the other thing, orchids, sorry, not orchards. Orchids is one of his big things. He loves orchids, and we may have to have him back to talk about orchids.
That would be nice.
Matt and I met about, what, 10 years ago now in America?
Yeah, I think it was 2011 bird fair.
Yeah, so we met a long time ago. We've kept together in terms of contact, and it's all been good stuff. Right. Also with me tonight, with us, is Matt's colleague, Patrick Franke. Yeah. Patrick is in Germany, Matt's in America. Good evening, Patrick.
Good evening, David, and everyone.
It's good to see you. Yeah. Not a problem at all. It's good to see you. By the way, do you not think that Patrick looks a bit like a film star to me? He looks a bit like, you know, one of those smouldering actors in one of those films. Anyway, hello, Patrick. Thank you for coming. Just to give you a brief background on Patrick, he's a field biologist and recorder. So you record bird sounds. He's been involved in nature conservation since he was young too. But you got interested in sound recording in 2000, paving the way in the fields of bioacoustics and straight to ornithology in general. He completed his sound art studies in the Academy of Fine Arts in Leipzig in Germany. Yeah. With a diploma, and in 2008 he started working as a field ornithologist, primarily doing ornithological surveys, both onshore and offshore. So basically you are an ornithologist as Matthew, or as Matt is. How did you two guys get together, by the way?
Well, you want to take that one?
No.
And believe it or not, it was the same bird fair, but go ahead.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I think we wrote about crossbills. Matt approached me and asked me how's this, about the situation with the crossbills over here in Europe, and then we met excellently at the bird fair in 2008 or something, I think. Yeah.
I think it was 2011. I think it was the same one I met David at, because that was the only bird fair I was at. I mean, unless I was a magician. I mean, if I was a magician, maybe, but. So, yeah.
Just out of interest, to sort of give people a background, you are also both birders, yeah? Obviously you are, Matt. You go birding as well, Patrick?
Yes, I do, yeah. As you mentioned, I studied sound art, and both of the things, sound recording and birds, is what I actually do.
And regarding sound recording, talk us through that. What do you actually record?
I mean, the main focus is on birds, and a long time now, but I actually started with experimental music and stuff, and nowadays people just call it field recording as yeah, sort of music or something. So it's a bit different from biology, but yeah, my focus is on birds, of course, and yeah, I just collect sound recordings of anything interesting.
Okay, just go back to the music side. Are you still recording music now?
I mean, it's not really music. I make sort of sound art out of sound recording. So I make layer stuff to play it to an audience or something, or more like maybe a score or
Is it like Soundscapes? It's kind of like Soundscapes, right?
Yeah, Soundscapes,
Yeah.
I don't like the term, but yeah, it's actually Soundscapes,
Yeah.
Okay, and Matt used to work for the or at the Cornell Laboratory in Ithaca. And how long were you there for, Matt?
I was there about 15 years across 2 different stints, and still highly collaborative with them on several projects, including the Finch Research Network, who Holger Klink, who is the director of the Center for Conservation Bioacoustics at the lab right now, is on the board also at the Finch Research Network, and put up about 30 ARU units for us to put out in various parts of North America as part of a kind of a collect some preliminary data for crossbill diversity in North America. So, yes.
Well, I met you. I mean, I met you back in, as you said, back in 2011 or whenever it was. But I did come to the US a couple of years later, and you and I went birding. I remember it very well. It was particularly cold, and I was suffering without any doubt. But you know, you were fascinated then with finches. I remember there was a massive influx of redpolls, and I also saw my first ever evening grosbeaks. And I went to take a picture, and my camera battery had run out. I remember that very clear because they're very close to us. What was it about finches that really interests you?
Well, I mean, finches in general, I've always been endlessly fascinated with them since I was in the mid-90s. I took a job in Yellowstone, and I remember seeing a flock of red crossbills come fly in above me. I was at Upper Falls in Yellowstone, and I was just like, man, these are the oddest creatures feeding on these cones right here. I mean, I think the biggest thing that captures the imagination of people, because then let's face it, when you can capture the imagination of people, you're doing something right, is the mystery or mystique of them, that they're not always around. You know, some years are there, some years they're not.
Okay.
So.
And what about you, Patrick? Have you did you have a distinctive interest in finches before hooking up with this guy?
Actually, only in crossbills, but I think it's the same. That it's not predictable, and you have this eruption years. It's really something I always enjoyed, and I was always interested in bird migration. I used to work on a small island in northeast Germany. It's a ringing station, and I was completely blown away by seeing the masses of migrants. And when I saw my first, or witnessed my first crossbill eruption, I really got interested in it. And of course, I read Magnus Robb's paper about crossbill call types, and I really got hooked by it.
Yeah, so Patrick and I have been, discussing crossbills for, the last 10 years pretty much at this point.
You've got history. Now listen, Patrick, in 2012, you founded the Birds in Flight, an online ID guide for the identification of Western Palearctic migratory birds. Mm-hmm. What's that?
And the 3 guys who founded, or actually we founded it, a friend of mine, Matthias Putze, and I founded it. Back then, we already worked as field biologists, and yeah, the biggest part of it nowadays is monitoring bird migration. And we always complained, or all of our colleagues always complained about the lack of good ID literature and bird call CDs and stuff. There's just, until today, there are only a few CDs or something dedicated to bird migration, at least in Germany, sorry, at least in Europe. And so we decided to make it our own, on our own, yeah, so ourselves. And so we just started to photographing and sound recording every migrating bird we came across and put it on a website, actually just for us to, yeah, to get an overview and for colleagues. And then a lot of people said, oh, wow, we really appreciate you guys doing it. Yeah, let's expand the webpage more and more. And now I think it's more than 300 species or something. So a third guy joined us, Roland Neumann, and thing really took off. So we actually started just for fun, something, but then people said, yeah, this is what it needs. And if you can play sounds in the field or just check some flight pics, it's really helpful. So please do it, yeah.
Okay, well, obviously we're here to talk about finches, and I just wondered if you could basically break down, you know, what the Finch Research Network is all about and what finches are.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can show us your PowerPoint.
Okay.
Let's see here.
Okay. Matt, would you like to start?
You want me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I mean, this was, you know, this whole idea with the Finch Research Network, it's kind of, as any of these kind of things start, as Patrick kind of said, it was, you know, kind of a project that initially started as fun. And, you know, over the last, I've been doing this finch thing for about 20-something years. I did the first eruptive bird survey for the Lab of Ornithology in 1999, the eruptive finch survey. And, you know, I've been kind of doing this crossbill thing for that whole period of time. And then in the last 15 years, you know, what would happen is people would record crossbills and they would send them to me from around the world, including Patrick. He would send me recordings or I'd send him stuff, and we would try to figure out what call type we have. And, you know, what was starting to take place was this kind of organic process of people then wanting to go, hey, Young, where should I go in the country or North America to go record crossbills that we don't know much about? And so I would, you know, say, hey, I think we need some information from here or there. And people were traveling out of their own pocket, actually, and collecting data for us. And, you know, I got to the point where it was like people were kind of saying, you know, maybe we should, you know, launch a Finch Research Network, because I've always been interested in more than just crossbills. You know, when I was doing these carnivore camera sets, I would snowshoe in the mountains of the Cascade Mountains in Washington State, and to look to see if there were any pine martens or Canada lynx in Washington, which are listed as endangered in the United States, at least the Canada lynx. And on these snowshoe treks into the wilderness areas, you know, I had finches all the time circling in these coniferous forests, siskins, pine siskins, evening grosbeaks, red crossbills. And, you know, there weren't a lot of other species in the middle of the winter in these areas. So they kind of became my companion. And from there, this kind of love kind of grew. And then, you know, the whole idea behind eruptive migration, which I think is, you know, also what Patrick was getting at, the unpredictable nature of the migration patterns, and why, you know, he's also been so interested in finches. So anyway, one thing led to another, and this network kept growing. And at the time, we weren't even sure what we were going to call it. And then it kind of organically landed at the network was the last piece of it, the Finch Research Network. We said, you know what, let's launch this thing, because you know, decades ago, Ian Newton in the UK and Ron Pittaway here in North America kind of unofficially launched this network long before I came up with this idea, or we came up with this idea, I should say. You know, it was the 70s really that Ian Newton came over from the UK and worked with Ron Pittaway in northern Canada. And they were working on a snow goose project at the time. But if you read, there was an interesting interview in Living Bird magazine, the Cornell Lab Ornithology magazine, about a year ago, where Ian came over to work on this snow goose project with Ron in the early 70s. And Ian just kept asking questions about finches. And it was about a year later after that project. He didn't tip his hat on what he was working on, but it was about a year later that Ian then published his classic book on finches. I don't know if anybody knows that book or not, but anyway, so that kind of led us to launch the Finch Research Network, and here we are. You know, we want this to be international, not just North America, and that's why we see Patrick as such a key, you know, person to be part of this, because he's been following this crossbill thing for a long time. Hopefully that gives you a pretty good answer.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Newton is a legend. I mean, he's written countless books. I think one of the ones that I really love of his is the one on migration, bird migration, which is now changing hands for £700 a copy. But he's a god of the ornithological world. And it's really interesting to talk about eruptions, because, I mean, Andrea here in the audience says that she's a Zoomer. She said that pine siskin eruption to the southern US this fall has been incredible, and she had 50 to 60 at her feeders at a time in Grenville, SC. Where's SC?
Yeah, just to, we actually have a particular web page on a site that talks about what I just laid out about Ian and Ron, and we dedicate basically the whole startup of this thing to the two of them, because we wouldn't be doing this if they hadn't already expanded this to include, I mean, people kind of are fascinated by finches. So
absolutely. Now, you know, like, for example, when I was with you those years ago, and we had literally hundreds upon hundreds of redpolls, I remember going to a garden, and the garden was covered in snow, but on top of the snow was like a load of ants, which turned out to be redpolls. I mean, there were hundreds, weren't there, of all different sites, and we were trying to work out what the mealy from the whatever. Do these eruptions happen across the globe? I mean, I assume that we're talking about the same species across North America and Europe, or is it just a North American thing, for example, in that particular instance? Because this year, I believe there's been a bit of an eruption in Britain anyway, of redpolls. People have been, I even saw some in London when I was in London a few weeks ago. So is it all linked, or is it purely down to the conditions of where they were breeding and lack of food and they need to move on?
Well, you know, let me just say one thing, and then I want to pass it off to Patrick here a little bit to talk about, you know, how this what maybe is the linkage and how this all takes place. But clearly North America, and often there's not a link many years between the eastern part of North America and the western part of North America. Every so often we get a year where birds are moving on both sides of the country. And a lot of it has to do with relatively local or regional weather or climatic conditions, whether it's high precipitation or, you know, was it a warm year or dry year, so on and so forth, like that. The same kind of dynamic, I think, goes on in Europe. One big difference in North America, and this is one of the things that, you know, bloggers, we have a team of like 10 bloggers now on that are part of Fern, and we need to expand that to, you know, over in Eurasia as well, is out in the western part of the United States, it's much more of a montane-driven, you know, topography-driven dynamic. So eruptions tend to be on a smaller scale, and they sometimes are more up and down elevational gradients, where in the eastern part of North America, it tends to be the whole part of the continent. I don't really know, I mean, the topography, I don't know the topography all that well over in Eurasia, So maybe you could speak to that part, Patrick.
Oh, no, not really. I mean, I think it's a bit more complicated because, for instance, UK and Ireland, actually an island, Iceland is also in the west, so it's a bit more in pieces over here. The Iberian Peninsula, I think, and the south of Italy, it makes it all a bit more complicated than
Is that a
North
topography
America.
thing, though? Is that a topography thing, kind of like what goes on in the Western United States? Because it's in pieces in the Western United States compared to the eastern part of the or North America, I should say. Do you think topography drives that quite a bit?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Anyway, continue.
Patrick, can you show us your PowerPoint you have, please?
Yes. So we already talked about this. This is a webpage, finchnetwork.org. So yeah, the main thing, as Matt said already, in Europe and Eurasia will be to get more people in our network, or to build a team over here similar to the team over there in North America. And we actually to investigate more things, we need, of course, more data and expertise from other people. And whilst doing a bit of research, I found out that a lot of people, especially in the East, already did a lot of things on several finch species or groups of finches. And I think this will be the next step over here to approach those people. I mean, especially in Russia, and this is something, or let's stick to this for the moment. So what we need is sound recordings, observation data, ringing data, and pictures. And we would like people to upload it to the platforms they prefer, or just to write us. And the difference Matt and I discuss quite often is that it's a bit different situation here in Europe or in Eurasia than in North America, because we simply just don't speak the same language. So,
sorry, can I just stop you for a second, Patrick?
Yes, of course.
We can't see anything. We can just see your lovely name. We can't see your face or the PowerPoint. Are you just talking generally, or is this the PowerPoint?
No.
It'll be good to see you.
Okay.
Or see something. There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
There we go.
I switched to the presentation to the slides. I don't know what happened. Oh, that's a shame.
It's always
Is there a way of?
It works well in rehearsals, as they always say.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Patrick.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult because I can't see the slides now, but myself. Just give me a second. Yeah, I mean, I actually said everything about the next step, that we want to build the network over here, similar to the network in North America. And to do this, we like to invite people, and we will approach people all over Europe and Eurasia, and to work together, to build a real network, actually.
Yeah, that's the thing that Patrick and I have really talked about. I mean, obviously right now we just have Patrick, part of the Finch Research Network, that's overseas, or not North America, I should say. And the biggest thing is we just want to try to expand that scope to get more people involved. And again, this is a true network. This isn't, we want everybody to be part of this, whether it's observational data, as Patrick said, or whether it's, recordings or ringing or just connecting dots and communicating with one another, and reaching out to one another and trying to communicate across those language barriers that could sometimes exist when you have, such a huge area like Eurasia with so many different countries speaking so many different languages. What happens is it seems like there's a bit of a siloing where everybody kind of works in their silos. And we really want to try to make this collaborative. That's pretty much kind of where we're at.
Okay. Okay, so what we'll do then, Patrick, if you can't get it to share, I'll see if I can do it from my end, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, all right, so there you go, Patrick. In fact, is this the old one?
I don't know. No, looks fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah.
Looks good.
So we were at page 4, I think.
Oh, so have you gone through here? This is page 4 now, is it?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. So it's a bit different, like in North America. A lot of different countries, a lot of different languages, and it's not everything is well connected. So it's a bit different than just approaching people who speak all the same language. So there's a lot of papers out there about finches, but a lot of stuff is actually in local, let's say local languages. So there's a lot of stuff in Spanish, in Portuguese, and a lot of stuff in Russian, and it's hard to find all this stuff, and of course to read it. I mean, there are good translation services nowadays, but it's of course a bit different than just doing research in one language. So I think the first step will be to approach those people, find those people and approach them and ask them to join the team.
Yeah, we've already tried to approach some people, and some of it's just kind of keeping at it. If there's any translators out there that want to help us to be part of the network, that would be greatly appreciated as well. But yeah, it's a struggle with talking with Patrick. It's one of the biggest things that seems to kind of repetitively come up is, how do we build this collaborative network where people are interested in information sharing and data sharing to try to advance the science of finches globally? Because there's a lot of unknowns. There's so much unknowns, particularly, across Eurasia. So do we want to go to a next slide?
Yeah.
There we go.
And I would leave this to Matt to comment on this. Yeah.
You can kind of see where the concentration of recordings are there. This is Zeno Canto, everybody, of red crossbill recordings. And you can see also, so here's the, again, you know a lot about this as well, Patrick. So, there's been 3 different naming systems across Eurasia for red crossbill. And we've had this wonderful, in North America here, when I say we, I sometimes, I try not to make it too focused on North America for sure. But, we had Jeff Groth that came along in the 80s, and he traveled around North America and recorded these things and captured them and took measurements and did this absolute landmark study, monograph on red crossbill North America. And he's the one that first described the whole call type phenomenon. Now, as Patrick said earlier, that was in the late 80s, early 90s that Jeff did that. Magnus Robb, I think right around 2000, 2001, then came along and did a, kind of a smaller scale. Correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick. It was Europe and Netherlands that he mainly focused on?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he actually introduced Groth's ideas and Groth's work to Europe, and I think a lot of people immediately realized that it's something important and something hot. Yes, something, and also something which needs a lot of people, actually as a network. The three persons I quoted here, 2003, said we need a fresh look and an international research program, which unfortunately didn't happen. Yeah?
Yeah.
So it's never has been built. And instead of two more people, after Magnus introduced different taxonomy, if you like, for crossbill call types. So it's quite confusing, as you can see on this Xenocanto screenshot. If you look for something particular, there are the same things under different names. So it's really difficult to find something, or at least it's a lot of work to get all those things together. And that's what Matt and I did almost 2 years ago now, just a spreadsheet with checking which is what and which names are actually the same stuff. So
Yeah. So just to give, go ahead, you finish.
I was just going to say that how many species of red crossbill are there then? Because it looks like, looking at those dots, there must be at least 20.
Yeah.
Can I just, so just to give everybody, just to distill this a little bit for everybody, in the States, when Jeff described the call types, he described them in chronological order, 1 through, we're up to now 10. And, he kind of used that based on mostly flight call, but there is an excitement call that can be supportive, but not always definitive. So Rob then came along, Magnus Rob in 2000, came along and described the call types in Europe and Netherlands. And I think he had A, B, C, D, E, F, and X. Was it in that? I think it was. Patrick?
X came a few years later. Yes.
Yeah, X came a few years later. So then, just to give everybody, so everybody can wrap their head around where we're going with this, is then, another scientist came along a couple years later, and you can see Edelar, Summers, and Ivachenko in 2003 said, well, we need this international kind of network to so we're all speaking the same language when we talk crossbills, and we're all using the same scale when we're doing the audio spectrographic analysis. But what has happened is Magnus did this A, B, C, D, E, F, and then another person came along and then did the kind of a combination of flight call with excitement call, and it became this like 1A and 2A and 3B kind of things, which means, it's flight call 3, excitement call B, something along those lines. And then another one came along and has now described, possibly upwards of 27 different call types using that third naming system. So it's kind of a quagmire in some ways. And when we say, there's really a need to be able to communicate, in one kind of international, body where we could kind of like talk with one another, you can't understand what people are getting at if you darn speaking the same language, as we all kind of know. It makes it tricky. So when people say, this is, call type 2IIIB, my head wants to kind of explode at that point. It's very complicated. Does that make sense? David, what do you think?
I am confused in terms of I understand what you're saying, but I also understand the frustration because there's so many different variations.
And so in this,
Matt,
go ahead.
Please. Yeah, this is something Matt and I discussed. So there was a paper recently by Ron Summers who introduced the double naming system, and he described variations of call types he described. And he did this triple naming system now, and this is something the third person did in our opinion. So this is something we discuss. So there are different approaches, really. We talk about call types, and we see, of course, like in North America, that several call types have a broad variation. And in our opinion, it doesn't make sense to describe every variation as a separate call type, because there is variation within the call types. And this is maybe, when it comes to red crossbill, the first thing we are heading for is to make groups of call types or something. Yeah, but the problem I tried to show with the slide is that a lot of birders and ornithologists already use different systems and even upload it to a database like Xenocanto, which makes it really difficult to communicate about something. And some people actually use all three naming systems now when they communicate about something particular, which is not really what I prefer.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you can't communicate with one another when you have multiple different naming systems. And that's really the big point we're trying to get across here, is trying to build a network of people that are willing to kind of communicate across lines and try to figure out, can we simplify this and make it a more understandable, system for everybody? Like fortunately, Jeff Groff laid out here in North America, where we just have type 1, type 2, type 3, 4. There's 3 different naming systems over there. So I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of crossbills, unless you really want to. But we could also pick some of this up in the in the chat afterwards as well. So
there's one thing I'd like to add. Like with my other project, Birds in Flight, we always keep in mind that we welcome beginners and new people, and we would like to people joining the team or to contribute something. And for those people, it has to be as simple as possible. Not that we want to simplify complexity, but it has to be simple to not frustrate, to be too frustrating. Yeah. And I think this is really important.
This is doable. It's doable, but it's somewhat the barriers with different language barriers that are really kind of tricky.
Okay, let me go back a bit. Let's talk about. I mean, we kind of missed it in the very beginning of the talk, but for those people out there who are not so proficient on finches, who don't really understand them, who are new to the whole idea of a finch, could you just explain right from the very beginning, what constitutes a finch? I've asked that question before, so you've had plenty of time to think about it again.
Oh my God! Sometimes it doesn't get that easier. I think I emailed you earlier today. So here's the deal. There's been 2 major, kind of definitions on what makes a species, and then up until the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was the morphological species concept. So people were describing species and grouping them according to family based on morphological features, whether it was plumage, whether that was bill size or shape, whether that was all kinds of different aspects went into that. But in recent times, the last 20 years now, the phylogenetic species concept has really kind of come to the forefront. And that has been based on genetics. And so what makes a finch a finch? Finches were described throughout our literature. What is a finch for decades, hundreds of years even, based on the fact of a kind of a bird that had a conical bill that was a seed-eating bird. And that's really, in its most simplest terms, what makes a finch a finch. Now, getting to this phylogenetic aspect of things with genetic studies, is what has happened now is, species that actually look similar structurally could have a conical bill, somewhat of a conical bill, and feed on seeds, aren't necessarily closely related. And that's partly, you have elements of convergent evolution taking place. And I don't want to go necessarily down that rabbit hole, but you can have different niches of birds and different families that maximize feeding on seeds. And what you have then is you have different species and different groups or different families that can look a lot alike. But in the basic level, it's a conical bill that eats seeds. That's a finch. But Galapagos finches, just to give you, so hopefully you can wrap your head around it, Galapagos finches have been named Galapagos finches since Darwin. But they are now grouped with tanagers. So they're not actually finches.
Okay, well, we can have a whole different conversation about what is a tanager, what is a finch, what is a bunting. We can
Yeah.
So, shall I get the next slide on?
Yes, please. So on this interesting thing, I think most European birders will know it. Not long ago, there was this discussion in Europe about this strange calling bullfinches. All people were talking about it. We never heard this call before, and so on. And this is another good example how important it is to know the literature. And there's a German book called Exkursionsbuch zum Studium der Vogelstimmen, maybe the first book on bird sounds, at least as far as I know. And Alvin Vogt, the author, actually described both flight calls of the Nordic bullfinch and the European bullfinch, and wrote they regularly appear in winter, are much bigger, and the call is quite different. So it's a bit funny that people in 2000 or 2010 actually discuss what kind of bird this is when a guy in 1894 described it already as a regular winter bird.
Yeah.
And what we would like to do is to look at the whole Eurasian bullfinch subspecies, or all subspecies. And I found out that a Russian guy already did it and published something or some papers on bullfinch call types. And he didn't call it like this, but again, all of his papers are in Russian, so it takes a bit of effort to read all the stuff. My Russian is not good, as you can imagine, so it's it's a very interesting case.
That barrier again. You know, here we have somebody that described something over 100 years ago, and then there was some birds found in 2010 that were clearly different. Spiked that new conversation, and then Patrick did some research on it and found out it was already, some of this might be already published. We don't really know what is published in that Russian paper because we're not expert translators in Russia. So it gets back to that same barrier that we want to increase this network of people that hopefully can kind of take an interest in this and start communicating with one another, and we could put the pieces of the puzzle together. That's really what the Finch Research Network is all about. And it doesn't have to be hardcore science. It could be just a recording. It could be just connecting dots and communicating with somebody and helping us. So, yeah.
And it's the same with the Halfinch. I just checked my own recordings for Halfinch flight calls, and Matt said maybe it could work to check the Halfinch as grosbeaks have different call types, and maybe you can say some more things about the grosbeak. So I just briefly checked my own recordings and already found 3 different call types, or 2 of them recorded in Germany and 1 in Mongolia. So it's obviously worth to check all all Halfinch flight calls for more call types, and maybe we will find, with help of people from the east, to find more out about it and their geographic ranges and all this stuff.
Yeah, so just to give everybody a little bit of context, like what's a call type? So in eBird, these are recognized taxonomic units, and what has been implied with, particularly with red crossbill, is, with the different call types comes a different ecological specialization, because there's slightly different morphologies in each of these different call types, which some of them align with different subspecies. But evening grosbeaks in the States, there's 5 different call types. And again, like I said, there's a bit of an implied different ecological specialization there, and they occupy different regions. So do we know if we're losing some level of biodiversity that we don't even know? Are these potentially species? We don't really know yet. They could be. And so when Patrick and I were first, really started to ramp up the idea of getting this off the ground, I said, hey, there's evening grosbeaks here in the States. There's 5 different call types. So there's 3 different Cocothrastus in the world. And there's evening grosbeaks, there's hooded grosbeak in Mexico, and there's the Halfinch in Eurasia. And so he looked at, some recordings, and sure enough, there's different call types that are involved there. So, we need to do some looking. Now, the call type phenomenon does not exist across most of the finches. So I don't want everybody to think this is like, a uniform thing, but it does seem to exist in certain groups. The Cocothrastus finches, the crossbills, bullfinches seem to have something going on there. But siskins and red poles, and I don't believe rosefinches have it going on either. But I don't know that for sure. Or we don't know that for sure, I should say. So.
Okay. Talking about rosefinches, I remember you telling me an interesting fact about, in terms of evolution and rosefinches. I'm sure a lot of the Zoomers here are familiar with rosefinches, but what's the, you were telling me about the rosefinches and the fact they went to the Galapagos Islands many millions of years ago, or whatever it was?
No, it was, I think it was something like 5 million years ago. So the whole idea is a group of common rosefinches, presumably during a storm 5 million years ago, landed on Hawaii, actually. And it's one of the most well-known, well-studied adaptive radiations of speciation event. Whereas this, group of rosefinches landed on Hawaii, and then they adaptively radiated out to occupy little niches of habitat on the islands of Hawaii, and they adaptively radiated out to 55 different species from one species from Europe or from Eurasia. And so over time, and this gets back to what makes a finch, kind of interesting and also a bit bizarre, is, if a species can kind of forage somewhat efficiently in a certain niche, over time they have to evolve characteristics to succeed. Otherwise they go extinct. And so over time, in Hawaii, 55 different species adaptively radiated out, and like the eewee has a bill shape that's almost like a hummingbird, and that's a finch. It's a fringillid finch. So even though what makes a finch, everybody has come to think of it for the longest time, particularly when we used to be following more of a morphological species concept, a conical bill that forages on seeds. The eewee adaptively radiated from this group of rosefinches that landed there out to forage with this long sickle-shaped bill that looks nothing like a finch, to forage on like seeds in these long tubular flowers. So it's an ever-changing dynamic, but it's pretty fascinating to think how these speciation events kind of explode. And it's the same kind of thing. That event is the same kind of event that took place on the Galapagos Islands. Any kind of islands, speciation events can happen at a much more rapid pace or time scale.
Yeah, okay. So in a nutshell, you're looking for people to help you collate records to kind of chart finches around the world effectively. I assume you don't need to have much level of knowledge. I mean, what do you need to actually help do this for you? And how do you actually practically sort of send this information to you?
You know, I mean, you don't, yeah, we want all people that like finches to be part of this. So again, and it can be right down to the level of just, hey, you know, I watched this presentation a year ago on the Finch Research Network. You know, maybe you run into somebody that also has an interest in finches, but they're more of a scientist. And you go, hey, maybe you should communicate with this group that I know about, this nonprofit that started the Finch Research Network. And then just reach out and email Patrick if it's in, you know, over, you know, in Eurasia, or reach out to me and let us know, like, hey, you know, I ran into this person. It seems like he's a, you know, a finch enthusiast, whether he's a recordist, whether he's actually a scientist, and let us know, because there might be something there that we could connect a piece of the puzzle. We could fill in that piece of the puzzle and expand this network globally, like Pim Adelar said we needed to do in 2003, you know, the citation that Patrick put up earlier. I think that's really at the basic level. You know, if you bump into somebody that's into finches and they're sound recordists, or they know a piece of information, you know, connect them to us. Now, if you're really a researcher, or you want to get more involved and you want to, you know, record birds, or you want to, you know, travel around to look into bullfinches, you know, let's talk too, and see what can maybe happen, or even a translator on some of these papers that we have. We're looking for any kind of support, because it doesn't have to be a scientist necessarily, just somebody that's interested in advancing the knowledge of finches globally. That's really what brought us all together. That make sense?
Absolutely. So basically, all you guys out there, new Zoomers, you know, start contributing. If you see finches, just start recording them and sending your information to the Finch Research Network. Sorry. Now, before we kind of wrap up this first hour, I need to actually ask Patrick for his favorite bird. Have you got a favorite bird, Patrick?
In this context, is actually the Halfinch. I just like them. It's that's why I immediately looked into it when Matt mentioned, yeah, there could be something like call types, and I thought, wow, Halfinch, yes, I want to dive into it. It's a fascinating bird.
Okay, and if you could be in, by the way, Matthew, what's your favorite bird? Yeah, what is your favorite bird? Yeah.
Well, I mean, my two favorite, I mean, I kind of have two spark birds, and they were, you know, shockingly, they were both finches. Although I do love warblers a lot, everybody. I love my warblers. There's second to finches, North American warblers. But, you know, evening grosbeaks and red crossbills were kind of my two spark birds. And I knew little, when that happened, I knew nothing about the evening grosbeak call type thing, because that had not been published until 2001. I did know a little bit about the red crossbill, obviously the call type thing going on, but it was those two species that are my favorite. It's sometimes, you know, ask me on different days which one I like more, and I might give you a different answer. So yeah, those two.
Okay,
I'm gonna go with.
If you could be anywhere on this planet, notwithstanding the current circumstances, where would you be right now?
Was that to me or Patrick?
Both of you, but start with you, Matt.
You know, right now, believe it or not, well, yeah, right now, believe it or not, I would not want to be anywhere else in the world, because for those of us here in the States, and I think some people in North America mentioned it in the chat here that I have open, about this is truly a super flight finch year, in particular the eastern half of the States. And I was out yesterday birding, and there's 10 species of finches in eastern North America, and I had 9 of the 10 of them. The only one I missed was hoary redpoll, which I got to ask you quickly, David. We had some that day. We were looking at the redpolls, right? We had hoary redpoll, or Arctic redpoll, it's known as.
Exactly. Yeah, we did. We did. Well, we
Yeah,
saw some
yeah,
birds that looked like they were.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I would not want to be anywhere else because literally I'm surrounded by a finch fest here in North America and in upstate New York right now.
Okay, Patrick, same question to you. Where would you be on this planet, notwithstanding the current pandemic?
Central Asia, Kazakhstan, maybe Mongolia. I love arid areas and super specialized birds. That's it.
Well, that's a good choice. Okay, well, I just want to, at this point, thank our sponsors, which I didn't in the beginning. Slap my wrist there. Leica Sports Optics and King's Place Music Foundation, as this is part of their year of unwrapping nature. And so thank you to those guys. And also, a quick thing, I never normally say stuff like this, but I'm going to say it. I have a load of t-shirts I need to get rid of. And they're on my website. They're only £5 each. Get rid of them, please. Take them. Just take them. I'm offering that to all the Zoomers. And by the way, just to let you know what's coming up in the next few days. Tomorrow we've got a guy called Lawrence B, who will be talking about Britain spiders, because he's written a book on Britain spiders. And then the day after we have Melissa Harrison, who is a writer, nature writer, naturalist, and she'll be talking about writing, nature writing. On the 26th of November, we got Rick Simpson from Wader Quest talking about protecting the world's waders. On December the 8th, we got Scott Wiedensall and Barbara Vickery, who have written a book called The Birds of Maine, and they will be talking about the birds of Maine on December the 1st, Tuesday, December the 1st. On the 3rd of December, we've got Terry Townsend, who's actually based in Beijing, talking about urban birding in Beijing. On the 7th of December, Keith Betton, who might be known to some of the British Zoomers listening or watching, he'll be talking about the art of public speaking in the conservation world, which should be a very interesting one. He used to work for the travel agency or travel group ABTA, so he'll be talking about that. On December the 8th, we've got Amir Balaban from Israel, and he's talking about art and urban nature in Israel. And we then have Pascalis Dougalis, who's an artist, on December the 9th. He'll be actually drawing and painting live for us. He's from Turkey originally, but lives in Germany. He's a fantastic artist. On December the 10th, we've got Heather Wolf, who's a birder from New York, who's going to be talking about birding in Brooklyn Bridge Park. And then the day after we have, or should I say the 14th of December, we've got Joel Ashton, who is going to be talking about urban wildlife gardening. And so far, finally, but there are going to be more people, Melissa Grew, who is an amazing photographer from America. She'll be talking about conservation storytelling with a master, well, by a master.
And she's, I can just say about Melissa, she's, we're kind of been in the field doing some photography with finches, so she's phenomenal. So
cool. And
yeah.
if you want to see all that stuff I've just spoken about, you'll find it on our live webinar link, which is in the chat, which Maya very kindly put up for us. So, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you both for sparing the time this evening, this morning, this afternoon, to talk to us about your really interesting work. And I really hope that you get many more people joining in.
Yeah, thanks for having us again. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Always good to see you. Good to see everybody.